On the 13th of July 1911, a month or so after his coronation, King George V invested his 17-year-old son Edward as Prince of Wales. The investiture took place at Caernarfon Castle. This investiture was a ceremony that included elements of both revival and of innovation. It was a revival in part of a practice from the distant past, for up until the reign of James I, the firstborn son of the English sovereign, after being granted by letters patent the title Prince of Wales, would be invested by their father with symbols of that status and office. The form of those symbols is in fact laid down in the late medieval wording of the letters patent creating a Prince of Wales. In fact, that wording is still preserved to this day and was last seen in the letters patent creating Prince William as Prince of Wales. It reads, "We ennoble and invest with the said principality and earldom by girding him with the sword, by putting a coronet on his head and a gold ring on his finger, and also by delivering a gold rod into his hand, that he may preside there and may direct and defend those parts." Such an investiture with a prince with symbols that reflect the authority delegated to the prince from the king was not something unique to the heir apparent. In fact, until 1621, new peers of the realm above the rank of earl were similarly invested with robes and coronet by the king, and new dukes were invested with a rod. The investitures of medieval and early modern princes of Wales had generally taken place in England, and usually in or within the orbit of London, and generally within the private context of the royal court. Here's just a few examples. Edward, the son of King Henry VI, was invested in Windsor Castle in 1454, the year after his birth. Edward of Midland, the son of Richard III, was invested in the Archbishop of York's palace after a mass in York Minster on the 8th of September 1483. Prince Arthur, the son of Henry VII, was invested as Prince of Wales, aged 4, on the 27th of February 1490 in the Palace of Westminster. And Henry, Prince of Wales, the son of James I, was invested in 1610 at Whitehall. So an investiture of a Prince of Wales was traditional, but what was particularly innovative in 1911 was to make it a public affair in Wales and in Caernarfon. Now, Caernarfon is a place that has deep resonances, and not entirely positive ones, from a Welsh perspective. Caernarfon Castle is the centrepiece of a string of castles built by King Edward I in the 13th century to control the northern part of Wales and prevent insurgents from the native Welsh population. It is a symbol of the Plantagenet conquest and subjugation of the Welsh. It was in Caernarfon Castle in April of 1284 that Eleanor of Castile gave birth to the future King Edward II. When Edward was 16 in 1301, his father, Edward I, declared him to be Prince of Wales, the first English heir to bear that title. The idea of making the investiture of Prince Edward in 1911 a public ceremony is said to have been the brainchild of Bishop Alfred Edwards, the Bishop of St Asaph, who suggested the idea in turn to David Lloyd George, the MP for Caernarfon and then Chancellor of the Exchequer. Lloyd George was also Constable of Caernarfon Castle and would have a prominent part to play in the ceremony. And the King, George V, was all too happy to agree to the suggestion. Lloyd George thought that the ceremony and national celebration would improve relations between the Welsh and the English. For this very first public investiture of a Prince of Wales in 1911, and in the near complete absence of the symbols mentioned in the letters patent, it was decided to make a set of robes and regalia as new for Prince Edward to wear. All the regalia was made in a very self-conscious medieval Gothic revival style. Now, I suspect the decision to do this was to create an impression that the spectacle people were seeing within the medieval stone walls of Caernarfon Castle was neither a revival or an innovation, but was somehow a ceremony that, like the coronation, had survived from the Middle Ages. The medieval revival coronet, made partly from Welsh gold, was designed by and made by Garrards, the crown jewellers, and is of an open form without arches, and the circlet is decorated with alternating fleur-de-lis and crosses, as in the imperial state crown and St Edward's crown. Between the crosses and the fleur-de-lis are little trefoils that are each surmounted with faceted amethysts mined in Wales. Then around the circlet are alternating gold beads, pearls and cabochon amethysts set in claw settings. The rest of the regalia was also made by Garrards, but it was all designed by a well-known Welsh sculptor, Sir William Goscombe John. Here he is, carving a statue of King George V. He was knighted in 1911 for his work on this regalia. Goscombe John used traditional motifs, but presented these in a wonderfully free and inventive way. The rod is in the form of a sceptre, a short staff of gold that terminates in a representation of the Prince of Wales's coronet. The coronet itself is supported on 3 little putti, who hold it above their heads, and it forms a setting then for a large amethyst. The top of the rod below the putti is decorated with the Prince of Wales feathers, ostrich feathers, which since Edward the Black Prince in the 14th century have been the heraldic badge of the Prince of Wales. Here is also engraved the German motto of the Prince of Wales, Ich dien, I serve, which was also adopted by Edward the Black Prince after the Battle of Crecy. The story of that will have to wait for another time. The sword has a beautiful silver-gilt hilt. The pommel is in the form of a coronet again, supported by 2 Welsh dragons that intertwine, their joined tails forming the grip and then separating to form the guards on either side. The motto Ich dien is also on the hilt and on the blade, and on the latter it is engraved and accompanied by a crowned E for Edward. On the reverse in Welsh is engraved Edward's style and title and the Prince of Wales feathers. With the sword came a velvet-covered scabbard and belt. The ring is a little masterpiece, almost something out of a fantasy novel. Of gold, it is set yet again with a cabochon amethyst supported by 2 Welsh dragons. For the investiture in 1911, Prince Edward wore white silk breeches and an ermine-trimmed robe of purple velvet embroidered with Welsh daffodils and held together by a gold and amethyst clasp, also designed by Goscombe John. Edward looked every inch the medieval prince. All of this new regalia were dubbed the Honours of the Principality of Wales, a title that was entirely made up in 1911 to establish them with a similar status to the Regalia of Scotland, the Honours of Scotland. Now, in 1936, when Edward VIII abdicated, he had in his possession his 1911 coronet, and as Duke of Windsor, he took it with him into exile. In 1953, he and his wife, Wallis, Duchess of Windsor, settled down in Paris in a house that would be their home for the rest of their lives, and the coronet was presumably kept there. The royal family are guarded about when the coronet returned to the royal collection. It may have been after the Duke's death in 1972 or that of his Duchess in 1986. Edward VIII's great-nephew, Charles, now King Charles III, was made Prince of Wales in July of 1958. It was felt that he should wait until he was 20 to be invested, and in 1969 he had to endure a repeat performance of the 1911 investiture ceremony in Caernarfon. Although all the previous objects from the 1911 regalia were all reused, the coronet was of course not available, which is why the coronet of Charles, Prince of Wales, was created to stand in for it. Designed by the architect and goldsmith Louis Osman, it is a futuristic, modernist interpretation of a traditional coronet, and it was the gift to the prince from the Goldsmiths Company and was designed to show off the latest innovations in the goldsmith's craft. Osman produced a wax version of the circlet of the coronet, from which was made a resin mould, and the 24-carat gold that it's made of was electroplated, or more accurately electroformed, into this mould. This technology was entirely new. The band has 4 stylised crosses and 4 stylised fleur-de-lis, which are made of 22-carat gold, primarily from a nugget of Welsh gold. There is an arch over the top surmounted by a mond and cross, and it was recently revealed that the mond is in fact an electroplated plastic ping-pong ball. This was engraved by Malcolm Appleby with the Prince of Wales's insignia. The mond is encircled with a curious setting of 13 diamonds that are arranged as the constellation Scorpio, which is the Prince of Wales star sign. The crosses on the circlet are studded with diamonds and the fleur-de-lis with emeralds. It's perhaps less well known that Charles's coronet was used a second time in 1970, when the prince, who had now come of age, was introduced as a member of the House of Lords. Precedent demanded that it be carried before him on a crimson velvet cushion, and it was borne in by his equerry, squadron leader David Checketts. So what do we know of earlier coronets and regalia used by English princes of Wales before 1911? Well, the evidence prior to the English Civil War of the form of the coronet is rather scanty, but we do have two illustrations that show Henry Prince of Wales and Charles Prince of Wales, the two sons of James I, in their coronets and robes. The first image is an illuminated initial of the letters pattern creating Henry Prince of Wales, and the second is an engraving of Charles by Wenceslas Holler. The coronets they are both wearing differ little from the crown of their father, a circlet topped with alternating crosses and fleur-de-lis, and inside a cap of maintenance surmounted by a tassel. However, the coronet is crucially without enclosing imperial arches, like the state crown. Notice too in both images the gold rod. It isn't in the form of a sceptre like the 1911 rod, but is rather a long rod of gold, very plain, similar to the rods borne by the chamberlains of the royal household. What became of the pre-Civil War coronet and regalia is impossible to say. They certainly didn't survive the interregnum. At the Restoration, with Charles II having no legitimate son and heir, there was no need for the creation of a coronet for a Prince of Wales right away. Charles did, however, regulate the form of any future prince's coronet, and it differed in form to the archless coronet worn by his father and his uncle. Under a royal warrant of 1677, the king prescribed that the son and heir apparent of the crown shall use and bear his coronet, composed of crosses and fleur-de-lis, with one arch, and in the midst a ball and cross. Although James II's son James was briefly Prince of Wales in 1688, no coronet was provided for him as he was an infant, and no Prince of Wales coronet was actually provided until 1714, when one was made for George II, for use at the coronation of his father, King George I. It followed the 1677 warrant to the letter, with alternating crosses and fleur-de-lis and a single arch over the top of it, running from side to side. It was a sort of demi-imperial crown. This coronet does not survive, but it is depicted in this portrait of George by Godfrey Kneller. It was apparently set with diamonds and with pearls. It was somewhat more lavish in style and presentation than the coronets of peers. George II's eldest son Frederick wasn't allowed to come to England until 1728, the year after his father's coronation. In fact, he wasn't made Prince of Wales until 1729, so he had no opportunity to wear his father's earlier coronet of 1714, if it still existed. His sisters were, however, provided with rather fine coronets for the 1727 coronation, and one of these actually survives and was sold at Sotheby's in 2012. Made of silver, it is set with precious and semi-precious stones and was commissioned by the king from the Master of the Jewel House and made by Benjamin Pinn. When a coronet was finally commissioned for Prince Frederick ahead of his arrival in England in 1728, it was not nearly as fine as those of his sisters. Frederick's coronet was made of silver gilt and is more akin to the coronets of a peer of a realm, with fictive stones rather than real ones chased into the band. It has a peculiarly depressed style of single arch, a feature it appears to have shared with the state crown made for his grandfather in 1714. This coronet was never actually worn, and it is likely that it was designed to be purely symbolic. It is known to have been borne before Prince Frederick at the state opening of Parliament and other state occasions, and was similarly used by successive princes of Wales up to and including the future Edward VII. The coronet was also placed on Prince Frederick's coffin for his funeral obsequies in Westminster Abbey. By 1902, the coronet of Frederick was now very fragile, and it was necessary to commission a new coronet that could be worn by the future George V at the coronation of his father, King Edward VII. George was the first Prince of Wales to be present at a sovereign's coronation since 1714. The new coronet was made by Garrards, again following in form all the requirements of the 1677 warrant, but the arch of it was raised to match the height of the state crown of Queen Victoria. It is made of silver gilt and, like Frederick's, resembles the coronets of the nobility and has a cap of maintenance within it. The then 16-year-old Edward, Prince of Wales, would wear this 1902 coronet at the coronation of his father George V in June of 1912. His father had worn an ermine-trimmed crimson robe at the coronation in 1902, but Edward wore the coronet in combination with his garter robes. Thanks for watching. Over on my website, I'm offering a 2025 wall calendar for sale. A beautiful thing. I've really enjoyed designing it, and each month has an image of a medieval angel taken from my photographic collection. It would make a super Christmas gift. All sales, as with the Antiquary magazine, support the channel, allow me to travel to show you interesting places, to update my equipment, and to continue to offer quality content here on YouTube.